Welcome back, everyone. We're going to dive right into the hydraulic pump for X231, and we're also going to go down the rabbit hole right from the start, because the pump that we had on this tractor when we got it is not even close to, well, the original prototype unit that we can see from the archive photos was completely different from these production style 445 pumps, but that was long gone by the time we found the tractor. So the next most correct version I could have would be the early style 445 hydraulic pump, which looks pretty much like this one, but I've been through my pile of parts, as you can see from all this stuff right here. We've got an early right there, and so far I'm not liking what I'm seeing. So I'm going to be best off sticking with this later style 445 hydraulic pump that was on it when we got it. Outward appearances, they all look pretty much the same. There are a few differences here. This later style one has this 3-bolt removable cover around the main drive shaft. There are bigger bearings in it, and we do have wear plates that go between the 3 main pump body sections, which do make these later ones a lot more serviceable. The earlier ones did not have those wear plates, and it was just metal on metal components, and once everything wore, it's really hard to get them put back into shape again. So because of the increased serviceability of this later style pump and the fact that I have a couple more parts units just like this, I'm going to proceed right on ahead with this later style, even though it's about as far removed from what this tractor originally had as we can get. So that being said, let's take this one apart, see what we're up against. First, I'll peel the O-ring off of the pressure port. So this is the pressure port. That is the suction port for the pump. And we had that O-ring sits down in a furrow right around that pressure port. And then everything else was sealed with this paper gasket. And they used plenty of the orange sealer on it. Next, we've got 3 plugs. This one has the flow control valve behind it. It's basically a priority valve or splitter valve. It directs a certain amount of the pump's output to the power steering system at all times, and then also uncovers ports that sends the rest of the pump output to the remainder of the hydraulic system. This plug has the pressure relief valve under it for the power steering system, regulates everything to 600 to 700 psi, and this is actually a dummy plug because X231 had the whole front bolster blown up on it. This would have been the outlet line that feeds the power steering unit at the front of the tractor. Well, they just put this dummy plug in that has a dummy seat beneath it. That's what was installed on tractors that did not have power steering. Of course, they had to bypass that whole setup on X231 because, there we are, because that bolster was blown apart. So we just have that dummy plug and that seat in there. We'll do the pressure relief valve next. A little bit of spring pressure behind the plug, not bad. You just want to keep your finger on it. And there is an O-ring beneath the head of that plug, so we'll be sure to renew that. This long skinny spring comes out. And the fun part, getting the valve itself. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you can grab it with the shank of a drill bit. There we are. And it is plastic. Kind of surprising, but every one I've been into has been the same way. And finally, we'll do the flow control valve. Again, just be mindful of any spring tension, spring pressure that might be on there. Okay, so I gotta get that out of there. Look at what I found. I think they were trying to boost their pressure. Someone put a lock washer in under the plug and on top of the spring. That is not a highly calibrated device, but at this point on X231, does anything surprise us anymore? I know it doesn't really surprise me. Spring looks good. See if I can push that valve a little bit, going in through the pressure port here. There we are. This one moves rather freely. And Okay, that's interesting. This one has a couple of flats cut in it. Others that I've seen have been round all the way. All right, we'll just, I'm gonna have to do a little bit of research to figure that out. Yeah, so I couldn't come up with anything on my own, but this is what I had expected to see. You see the flutes all the way around. The one we took out of this pump has two very large flats on it. So if anyone out there knows the reason for the difference between this style and this style, please post up in the comments below. I can't find any information on it, and my literature for these pumps is pretty lacking, so I would appreciate the help. Onward. The front cover comes off next. This is where we really start seeing what we've got. We've got the 6 5/16 diameter bolts, and we've got 2 1/4" diameter bolts. It's loose, but it's sticking on the dowels. There's one back here and one up here. Okay. Well, at first glance, I'm not seeing anything that really horrifies me. I'm sure that'll change, though. Catch y'all up on what I just did off camera. First, I timing marked the gears so that we can put them back in the same mesh that they've been running in for all this time. Second, I used the depth mic to check the end play clearance of the gears to the pump housing. Also factored in probably another thousandths for the witness mark on that wear plate. We're running about 6 thousandths in clearance on the gears. That's getting a little bit to the loose side, but stick with me here. I'm about to hit you with some real honesty in a minute. I took the feeler gauge and I did the end clearance check as well. Gears to housing, we're running about 6 thousandths on this one and about 7 thousandths on the drive gear. I like to see about 5 thousandths max on all of these, but we have to take into account as well the requirements of the tractor that this hydraulic pump will be going on. Senior and I decided years ago, after seeing how compromised the rear end was, how compromised our drawbar bracket points still are, and how compromised the front bolster was after someone had mistimed that power piston and completely blasted this whole side of it right out. We made up our minds that we will never be using this as a working tractor. It'll just be a show queen on parade duty. The most work it's ever going to have to do is to climb up onto a trailer and drive itself back off again. Because if we took this out and put it under load and ever broke it as bad as it was broken before, it would be done. Just what it's taken us to barely get this back to running condition as is. If we had another catastrophic failure with no spare parts out there, we would call it quits, because we're barely getting by as it is. So a pump that has a little bit of reduced output because of internal wear, that's not going to be a bad thing. This only has to lift the 3-point arms with no weight on them initially with cold fluid, and once they're up in the air, the spool valve will hold them from there. And also a pump that maybe has a little bit lesser output after it gets warm, especially on that power steering, that's not going to be a bad thing either, because we don't really want to tax the repair that's been done to that front bolster. So yeah, the decision's been made. I know a lot of people in the comments section have been asking lately if this is going to make it out for plow days and the like. I would say no, hard no. So this pump, as is going to be just fine for this tractor. So we can take the center section off now. And an interesting thing about these grooves that are cut into each side, because even these pumps with the wear plates still largely rely on a metal-to-metal finely machined surface to seal. The thinking is any leakage that happens will get to this groove and be picked up by this suction port and returned back to the inlet side of the pump. So that's going to reduce anything that might make it all the way to the outside. It's not a positive seal, but it does go a long way toward keeping all of the oil in. Idler gear comes out. Shaft looks pretty good on each end, and there's a little snap ring on each end of it, holds it onto the shaft. You see a little bit of infloat right there. Then the drive gear is just splined to the main drive shaft. That can be lifted right off. Wear plate can come off. Again, that one looks not bad. Flipped over now, getting the 3 screws out of this front plate that is removable. It's a bearing housing, really, is what it is. So they've put so much sealer around this one. Usually you can just push them right out. I think this one might have to be tapped, maybe. Nope, there we got it. Yeah, look at all that stuff. They sure like their orange sealer. And we've got this ball bearing right here. Again, held on with snap rings. We'll get those out in a minute. Having a look in here, and then we have a needle bearing down in there backing it up. And so far, all the needle bearings have looked really good in this. But unless I decide to replace those bearings, this is as far down as the main housing needs to go. Snap ring coming off. There we go. Should be able to slide the bearing off of it now. Yep. Just assess that real quick. It's good. No play. Nice and smooth. And we've got a second snap ring down below it we need to take off now. Now the trick to this one is not getting it caught in the snap ring groove that the one above it was in. And they always want to go in there. Oh, I think I got it past. There, I got it. Just skipped out. Okay, now we can take the shaft out of the plate. And it's too bad the splines on this end are just about completely worn through, because the rest of that shaft looks really good. But the oil seal is still in here. We'll get that knocked out. Here we are, seal's out. Plate looks good. So we've got a lot of parts cleanup to do. Catch back up with y'all in a bit. Okay, everybody, I've got it all clean and it's been inspected. I'm happy with everything that is here. So real quick, to re-bearing these pumps, so this is the later style, and we have this bearing, and this bearing are all the B1212, and this is a larger needle bearing. Just in the later ones, this is a B1214. If this was the early style pump, all 4 of these would be the B1212s. Another difference, the early style pump has an input shaft seal. It is a SKF 7440, a little bit smaller than this later one. This later one uses the SKF 8646. I've got that loaded into the front cover already. We replaced the input shaft with one from what we'll just call the parts pile. Okay, this one was actually in very good condition, so really happy about that. The flow control valve was good. The spring also tested good. There's specs in the manual. They want that one to be at 39 to 48 pounds when compressed to a height of 1 57/64 inches. The relief valve spring, however, was quite collapsed and had been wearing on the side of the housing, so I sourced another one of those, again from the parts pile. Spec on that one is 31 to 38 pounds when compressed to a height of 1 3/4 inches. And when I assemble these pumps, I just lightly coat everything with a generic ATF fluid. That's what I've been running in X253, the prototype crawler. It's loved it. So we're going to do the same thing for X231. So let's start with the input shaft, and I have the splines and the snap ring grooves for that ball bearing all taped over to protect the lip of the new seal. Definitely don't want to damage it at this point. Once we get the seal and the cover in place, we'll just peel that tape back off. Now I've got the bottom snap ring in place. See it? That's the backstop for the ball bearing. That just slides right on, drops in place, and we'll secure it on the top with the second snap ring. Next, this O-ring has to go into the groove that is just cut into the backside face of that front cover. And I don't have like a part number or anything for you on this. This is one that I pulled out of my own personal kit, kind of my stash back from my automatic transmission days at the Ford dealer. We would get a lot of times the rebuild kits would just be like a master kit. So they would cover all model years of that particular transmission. And there were so many design changes over the years, and servos would be different sizes, apply pistons would be all different sizes. So sometimes you would end up with 3 O-rings to suit the one piece, depending on the model year. So you always had plenty left over. And I just put them all in a box, and when I left the dealer, I brought them home. And instances like this, it really pays to have a real good selection of O-rings on hand. We can load the input shaft into the pump body now. Lubricated that needle bearing with clean ATF. And I don't know if it makes a difference or not, but I noticed when I was taking everything apart, the front cover had this, it looks like a 0 or an O stamped into it, and it was in register with the suction port of the housing. So we'll just put it right back the same way that it was. Just like that. And with the 3 machine screws tight, the front cover and the input shaft are at home in the pump housing. Now I'm going to walk you through these next few steps real quick because I'm not going to be able to show them all on camera. But first, you'll notice when I cleaned this, I did not clean it to the point where it got shiny and we lost this slight discoloration on the surface. You want to leave all that intact. You don't want to erase kind of the general crosshatch grind surface that was put into these from the manufacturing process. If I were to clean this so that it was all shiny, that means I've removed metal and we've lost our perfectly flat finish. As long as we're clean, some discoloration is just fine. Isn't going to hurt anything. And the manual states that between the pump body parts and the wear plates, a light layer of shellac is permissible. I don't do shellac. I'm falling back to the Permatex Super 300 Forma gasket non-hardening aviation sealant because it works on everything and is resistant to everything as well. So I'll just put a very light layer on, almost transparent, because you don't want to have squeeze out in a pump. This is a suction passage right here. You don't want to block that, or you don't want pieces coming loose and getting circulated. I also don't encroach in too close to where the gears are going to be, because again, you don't want to have any squeeze out going in and impeding the gears. So I've already got a layer between the front cover and the first wear plate. They are different. You can see the one that goes under the front cover just has the 2 bearing holes in, and the one that goes on the pump body has the 2 ports. All right. If you stick to that pattern, it's impossible to put it together incorrectly. So just assume everything's got a layer of sealer as we go together. Wear plate goes on, copper color side up. Drive gear on the splines. Driven gear, we are going to, right there, off my finger, there's our other timing mark. Get those back in register with one another. Intermediate housing next. And finally, outer cover with wear plate. The 2 1/4-inch bolts and the remaining 5/16 bolts. 6 to 8 pound-feet on the 2 1/4-inch bolts and 9 to 12 pound-feet on the remaining 5/16. We'll do a test spin. There should not be any binding whatsoever. And as I suspected, this one's good. Of course, it's a pretty loose pump anyway. Exactly how I wanted it for this tractor. So, yeah, no problems there at all. Relief valve is next. So we'll just throw the poppet and the spring into the pump. And the cap has an O-ring that goes right down there. Make sure you put a new one of those on. And you will see a small little stack of round shims that are typically down in the bottom of the the tube portion of that plug. Being that we replaced the spring, I don't know how critical these are to go back in, but I'm just going to throw them all back in anyway. If you guide these in on a pick, it keeps them from falling all over. The flow control valve is next, and I'm going with the one that has the two flats cut onto the notched portion because it's the only one that has the center hole. You see that? And the manual states that that's how the priority valve works. The center hole allows about 2.5 gallons of fluid per minute to be prioritized and sent to the power steering. The other control valves I have here that have the notches all the way around in a circle, they don't have a center hole. So this is the one that I decided to go with. Get that put into place. Spring goes behind it. Get the oil off my hands real quick. Now for the cap. There is no O-ring that goes under the cap. It's even in the parts manual, it just shows the plug goes into the housing. I don't know what they expect to seal it. And I've always been torn because you can fit a copper washer on that plug, but then you're reducing how far the plug goes in and also reducing the spring pressure that's being applied to the control valve. So the general consensus amongst the Moline guys that I've talked to is just to do like I did, put a little bit of sealer on the base portion of that plug and just rely on that to keep any leaks under control. It seems a little bit hackish, but in this case, unless you were to modify the housing or the plug to accept an O-ring, I really don't see any other way. And to finish, we've got the open port that feeds the power steering system. This pump was blocked off originally on this port, and until we get a fitting and a line on there that goes to the front bolster, I'm just going to throw the same dummy plug and sleeve in, and it's not supposed to have an O-ring, but I threw one under there anyhow because we'll just go hand tight just enough to seal that passage. And we've got ourselves a pump. I do like that very nice tag that is on this pump yet. Usually they're all beat up. That one's pretty good. So next episode, we will figure out how to bypass this completely worn out and completely prototype drive coupling that hooks the pump up to the back of the live power shaft right there. Thank you again for watching, everyone. We'll get into that, figure out how to mount the pump. There's also a spacer sleeve that goes between the pump body and that live power shaft bearing sleeve that offers, or it adds additional in-thrust support to prevent that shaft moving to the rear. We need to figure all of that out. And then I think we will be done on X231 probably through the summer after that, or at least until I run out of other projects to do, if that ever happens, right? Hope to see y'all back again.